Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Olivia White of McKinsey Company and Jesper Brodin of Inga Group.
Great.
Thanks for being here today and for chatting. Let me start maybe with a little bit of a provocation for our conversation. So, question is, are we on the cusp of a new era? And if so, what can we do to make it better, change it, influence it for the better?
I think we are at an historic moment. In the last 300 years or so, we have been building one economic model, and we are trying to, in a couple of decades, to actually define the new economy. And based on understanding that we are on a planet where people and resources are basically not endless. So definitely so.
So let me, just as a little bit of one way of thinking about it, arguably since the end of World War II, we've been through three eras. So at the end of World War II, post-war boom. Sparked maybe by the oil crisis, but also some things that went before, an era of contention from the early 70s onward, marked by really a bipolar world order and inflation and a whole host of other sort of headwinds. Late 80s, marked roughly by the fall of the Berlin Wall, an era of markets, greater global connection, maybe unipolarity, and it's been a hard and complicated past couple years, but also what you're talking about, global energy systems, where's the climate going? And I guess part of the question is, does all of that, the things you mentioned, the cycles that we're going through, mean that there's something that's staring us in the face that could be fairly foreboding, but maybe we have the opportunity to shape it to be good?
Well, somebody said, a famous historian said, it's difficult to judge history when you're in it. So to start with, of course, what we're experiencing is many big trends at the same time. I would say, a few years ago, I was part of, like we do, of an exercise doing a risk mapping, likelihood, impact, and as always, we would say, well, that's not going to happen, and we put it in our files. When I looked at it recently, most of it is happening as we speak. So it's been an exceptional couple of years that we have behind us. And if you put it in the perspective, I think, of course, you would probably, in 10, 15, 20 years from now, you would probably speak to the pandemic, obviously.
Yeah.
The bullwhip effects of what happens when something like the pandemic happens in a fairly optimized open border trade world. So I think the whole bullwhip scenario will probably be there. War, conflict, politics is there. But I think the big thing really is that both the human existentialistic challenge of climate change, that then of course impacts all the social aspects for all of us, but also being an optimist, so to say, how we together, humans came together and defined the new pathway and the new economic model and a better world basically for more people. So I'm a big believer in that, and I have a lot of proof actually. Thought I would talk about that a little bit later. Let's see.
A book of proof. Like, in some ways, your point around being in it and not knowing quite until you're past it what's changed. Let me ask you a question about being in it right now, kind of for the world. I think about IKEA, at least, as a sort of symbol of the emerging middle class globally. Rightly or wrongly, you can correct me, but I wonder, to the degree that that's a fair characterization, what you think of your responsibility as being in helping people in the moment that they're in right now across the world.
So, I think to start with, the last years it's been evident for us that homes have become important for everybody everywhere at the same time. So to start with, I think our role to help people to solutions in life at home has been more important.
Right.
Then I would say, when I started in IKEA back in '95, I think was a moment for us, a defining moment where a company with a strong vision to create a better everyday life for the many people. We used to apply that on our business model in life at home, but these were the days where we became global, and we were started to be confronted with, do the values stay between our four walls, or do we actually need to apply them on everything we do? And that's the pathway we took. It was a lot of difficult decisions, but it led us to say that being people and planet positive is something we do for people in our supply chain, people that we're connected to, society, and so forth. And interesting enough, I have a lot of experiences from the scary moments of taking some decisions, investing in quality, investing in code of conduct in supply chain and so on, just to find out that every time we took those decisions, what was good for the world, it was good for the business. So I think our story is really about, the opposite will be very difficult in the period that we have ahead of us. So finding the sweet spot of doing what's right and doing what's good for the business is actually the same.
Can you talk a little bit about finding the sweet spot when you're a company that operates across a whole range of different places in the world, a whole range of culture? I mean, I know you spent a fair amount of time in Pakistan early in your career. You've spent time. How do you think about that as you engage as an employer, as somebody who interacts with supply chains? How do you?
So I spent I think a third of my career in Asia Pacific.
Yeah.
Pakistan was the first one. It turned out I was 25 years old and I applied for that job. I got it after many interviews, and after a year I dared to ask my manager how they dared to take a 25-year-old, no experience of Asia, no experience of IKEA, and put him in Pakistan. And then my manager told me I was the only one who applied for the job. So that's how I started, But it was an experience, and God bless everybody in Pakistan at this difficult moment. But it was an absolutely fundamental experience for myself also, when it comes to accepting some of the dilemmas in doing business. So I think if I have one learning over my years is people have tried to make me focus on differences, but it's better to focus on similarities. And when you do, having worked out of China, Indonesia, even places like Denmark,
Right.
Exotic places, if you look at what we have in common as humans and so on, sometimes the expressions, the way we express it comes out a little bit differently and so on, but we are so much the same. And if you look at life at home, homes around the world, where I have the pleasure to visit so many homes, which we do wherever we go, size might vary. Maybe the Japanese mattresses are a bit harder than the Americans. Watch out when you throw yourself in the bed in Tokyo. Cooking style can be a bit different, but most of the things are really same. So focus on similarities and you're going to get further.
So something that we all do have in common is obviously the world and the climate, and I know you're very committed to net zero, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about what the B team is, but also in that capacity and then in your capacity as CEO, how you think about what can business do to make the path to net zero be a productive and as smooth as possible one versus something that could be quite bumpy?
Well, it is bumpy and it's going to be bumpy, but I think, again, if you look at the motivation, to achieve net zero is an ethical and moral obligation of our generation. So any leader in my position, or my type of position, who doesn't assume that responsibility, even though we don't have the answers, I think it's simply not an okay way of operating. You have to accept that challenge. Secondly, if you look at your brand and what your co-workers and your customers demand you to be, you have to accept those challenges. And third, again, which there is a massive misunderstanding in the world, is that this will cost. So if you follow that pathway, of course, then sustainability will be for the rich and few, which is, of course, is not going to get us anywhere. So again, climate smart means resource smart, means cost smart. And therefore, part of the challenges that we are onto is also because the only way we can serve people with thin wallets in the future is by being based on renewable energy, based on circularity, and based on a new consumption model, so to say. So to that point, maybe, I brought this book because it's fresh. You can almost feel it's hot. It's one, at least, attempt to also reach out. So we printed it, actually. I may be old-fashioned here, but it's also, there is a digital version. But we want the people to be able to bring this home and share with their family and friends. So every coworker in IKEA got this book. And it's a full disclosure of our climate plan. It's what we have done, what we're doing, what we will do, including the areas where we are stuck. And in that moment, to maybe come back to organizations like B Team, World Economic Forum, and other organizations like we are represented by here today, some of the tasks needs to be fixed collectively. So IKEA, the group I represent, is simply not big enough to take on some of the challenges.
Yeah.
So therefore, some of the big challenges here, we need to make sure we don't up in catch-22, but that we actually engage companies, governments, organizations to do things at the highest speed.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for saying it. I mean, so some research we've done at McKinsey Global Institute is to look just at the cost of achieving net zero. And we have to be spending a lot more than we are today in some form, but that doesn't mean it can't be done in harmony.
I've seen a lot of the research from you, from BCG and so on, and I think I'm struck by how low that cost is. If you look at it, the inflationary aspects of what we're experiencing now is five-fold more than what we're asking from the investment. So why would you not invest in the new? Then there are some breaking points. There are some subsidies in the old that might have been motivated. And there are some system shifts that needs to happen in order to enable the new economy to happen. So I would say every business have some low-hanging fruits, and each one of us has some things that gives us gray hair, but still, this is the pathway we need to go.
What gives you gray hair?
I have 3 teenagers.
Okay.
And that, and maybe a couple of more things.
Yeah. Well, to go back a little bit to the cast of World Order, do you see, how are you thinking about geopolitical resilience in the world that we're looking at today?
Wow, it's a big question. When I was growing up in a corporate system, it was typically said that companies are fast and governments are slow. And just to find out, it's the absolute opposite. Shifts in governments and policies are going quite fast. 3-4 years, and suddenly you have 180-degree turns in the world. Yeah. We as a company, we're very asset heavy. We invest, we work long term.
Yeah.
So, when we step into a place, we do that for the good and the bad. And thereby we need to accept some of the shifts of moods. And of course, we all experience today that decades of open borders, free trade, are challenged by another political landscape. But again, I pledge to everyone, all leaders, to, watch out for the polarization. It's the easiest thing in the world to start to talk about each other rather than to each other. Yeah. US, China, Europe, and so forth. Because the only way we're going to resolve this is, of course, by collaboration together. And if we don't believe in win-win, we will all lose. So in the end of the day, I think we're pledging for everybody to say, what do we do to win this together? And again, we have much more in common than the opposite.
We're in the midst of doing some work on global flows, where that's trade flows, but also flows of knowledge, flows of data. And, it's striking both the degree to which those flows have started to be dominated less by flows of stuff and more by flows of knowledge and know-how. But also, even in the flows of resources and manufactured goods, just the degree to which region to region, we still are coupled. And one can talk about areas where those flows may dissipate a bit, but just how tightly coupled we actually all are right now. And I think in some ways that plays into if we don't work together.
It does, definitely.
Yeah. So we've got not all that much time left, but with that as a note, what would you leave people with as the thing that business leaders need to be thinking about in order to create a synergistic future?
I think one advice is we need to take some leaps of faith into the future. I remember in IKEA when we decided to phase out incandescent lighting and go all in on LED. At that moment, we didn't have a good business case. So we believed in innovation, we believed in scale, and we had a good bet. We took some decision many years ago to invest in renewable energy. The return on investment was very low. Today we have invested, we actually 130% invested from our own needs. That was a good decision way back then. A few years ago we decided to set up reversed factories to take back mattresses in Netherlands. Today the material is at such a good price that people are queuing up to buy the re-material, if you like. So again, I think it's about believing. So believing what is the right pathway. Yeah. And then some answers are obvious and some are not. And then we need to have a bit of patience that we're going to figure them out together. But this is the time for deep collaboration and actually daring to take risks in order to define the future we want to.
So maybe that's the new era.
I think so. let's see.
Pleasure to.
Thank
Pleasure
you so
to
much
talk
for
to
the
you. Thank you all for
Thank
being here.
everybody. Thank you. It's yours. Please.
Thank you.